Look at this lead pencil. There's not a single person in the world who could make this pencil. Remarkable statement? Not at all. The wood from which it's made, for all I know, comes from a tree that was cut down in the state of Washington. To cut down that tree, it took a saw. To make the saw, it took steel. To make the steel, it took iron ore. This black center, we call it lead, but it's really graphite, compressed graphite. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I think it comes from some mines in South America. This red top up here, the eraser, bit of rubber, probably comes from Malaya, where the rubber tree isn't even native. It was imported from South America by some businessmen with the help of the British government. This brass ferrule, I haven't the slightest idea where it came from, or the yellow paint, or the paint that made the black lines, or the glue that holds it together. Literally thousands of people cooperated to make this pencil. People who don't speak the same language, who practice different religions, who might hate one another if they ever met. When you go down to the store and buy this pencil, you are in effect trading a few minutes of your time for a few seconds of the time of all those thousands of people. What brought them together and induced them to cooperate to make this pencil? There was no commissar sending out orders from some central office. It was a magic of the price system, the impersonal operation of prices that brought them together and got them to cooperate to make this pencil so that you could have it for a trifling sum. That is why the operation of the free market is so essential, not only to promote productive efficiency, but even more to foster harmony and peace among the peoples of the world.
Concerning your comments, your non-controversial comments that there's no place for government in private medicine, what are your views on the regulatory powers of the FDA and the work that they're trying to do?
Well, you have a great many heart specialists in this room, I think, or some. I think if you ask them, they will tell you that there are some excellent beta blockers which are available in Great Britain, in Canada, and in the rest of the world, which cannot be sold in this country because of FDA regulation. I have seen estimates from reputable physicians that the availability of those beta blockers would save roughly 10,000 lives a year. I believe the FDA, as it has been operating, has done vastly more harm than good. I have no doubt that it has prevented some bad drugs from coming on the market. But in compensation for this, it has also prevented some very good drugs from coming on the market. It has made the cost of discovering and developing new drugs, it has increased it enormously. It has driven medical research out of this country and into other countries. So I think the FDA has been an unmitigated disaster over the past 20 years. Yes, sir.
Dr. Friedman, I'm fascinated by your question or your statement that licensure is something that has been a harmful effect, especially in the area of medicine. I think this probably comes as a bit of a shocker to most of us. What do you answer the particular problem which relates to control, say, of quackery, of inadequately trained individuals who are dealing with situations where vital decisions, of course,
sure,
don't have the option for the normal, slow process of people getting education, finding out what goes on during that particular period, and how do you worry about that?
Sure, you should worry about that. Let me ask you first a very simple question. How many people do you know who pick their physician by opening the yellow pages, taking all the licensed physicians, taking a pin and sticking it in?
Quite a number, I would suspect, might.
No, maybe. I don't know very many of those. My point is that having a license is no assurance of the ability to practice medicine. A man was licensed 30 years ago. He may be thoroughly incompetent now. So licensure is no assurance of quality. In the next place, we have lots of other assurances of quality. The fact that a man may offer himself as a physician doesn't mean that he can misrepresent his training. If I hang out a shingle saying I am a graduate of the Harvard Medical School when I am not, well, then I ought to be sent to jail, and I should be sued for fraud and misrepresentation. So that there's nothing about the absence of licensure that makes it unnecessary for people to be able to demonstrate their capacities. And indeed, you would be more inclined under that kind of a system to look at what an individual's qualifications were. We don't require licensure for lots of skilled professions. We don't require licensure in most states for an architect. Yet very few architects are able to practice successfully without having good training. In the next place, the way in which most of us, and this is why I linked this discussion to the Mayo Clinic, the way in which most of us get assurance of quality about anything is not because we directly can judge. If I go buy a shirt at the store, I can't judge the quality of a shirt. If I buy an automobile, I can't judge the quality of the automobile. We get our assurance from the middleman, from the department store, which stands in back of the shirt and which has a strong incentive to provide me with good shirts, from the dealer who wants to stay in business for a long time selling cars, has an incentive to provide an assurance of quality. People who come to Mayo's get their assurance of quality from the fact that Mayo Clinic has a very strong incentive to choose able, well-trained physicians. In the absence of licensure and the restriction on entries that accompanied it, you would have had a much greater development of hospital group practice of this kind, which would have provided a very much more effective technique of selection, of quality of medicine. Next, the fact that you have had licensure has made it much more difficult over decades to eliminate low-quality practice. As you know, only in recent years you've had a spate of medical malpractice suits. One of the main reasons why you didn't have many more of them earlier was because the American Medical Association had a concerted policy of making it extremely difficult. Physicians who were willing to testify in such cases found that they lost their hospital credentials. Now you come, why is licensure so essential? Because it is the key to the power of organized medicine. Without it, they would have no power to do harm. They would have lots of power to do good, but no power to do harm. Why is that the key? Because the key to the control of medicine starts with who is admitted to practice. Now, you cannot do it at the stage of licensure itself. If a man has gotten through medical school, if he is interned and so on, it's going to be very hard ultimately to deny him a license. He's going to take the exam over and over again. If you want to control entry, and don't make any mistake about this, the evidence is overwhelming that there was a deliberate policy on the part of the Medical Association in the 1930s to keep down the number of physicians. That policy has changed in recent years for various reasons, but it was a policy for a long time. The most effective way to do it is to, before people start going into medical schools. And licensure was a key to this because the licensure laws in almost every state, as a result of the pressure of the organized medicine, require that nobody may be licensed who is not a graduate of an approved medical school. And by some strange accident, the list of approved schools in every state is identical with the list of schools approved by the Council on Medical Education and Hospitals of the American Medical Association. And I can go down the line, a long line of them, and you will discover, every time you look at this, that the key element is licensure. Now, moreover, licensure is critical to preventing the unauthorized practice of medicine. You and I know, and many of us know, that there are many medical practices which can perfectly well be carried out by people who do not have the full training. People who are medical technicians. There has been some increasing use of them in recent years. But one of the main factors that has prevented a more effective use of medical technicians, a more effective use of the physicians, has been the definition of what is medical practice and what is unauthorized. You've started me on a subject on which I could go a long time, but perhaps I've said enough to suggest that it isn't quite as simple as it may seem at the outside. That a label of good housekeeping is not the same thing. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Friedman, you mentioned that 80% of the people in the country are covered by private insurance plans. I'm curious as what your proposal would be to cover those who presently are not covered and those who truly cannot afford at this point because they are below the so-called poverty level, they are not in organized labor, they are not a member of a large corporation which provides such a plan for its employees.
I said before, I do not believe you ought to have any special program for medicine at all.
Yes, I understand.
I believe, I have long been in favor of substituting for our present whole set of welfare arrangements a comprehensive negative income tax, which would provide to individuals below a level a sum of money which would assure that they would be able to maintain a particular level. There is no reason why part of that sum of money cannot be spent on the purchase of the same kind of medical insurance everybody else has. I have long been opposed, and I think you should be opposed, to giving special sums of money for people for housing, and another sum for food, and another sum for clothing, and another sum for medical care. We ought to give people, the problem of poverty is money.
Right, exactly.
And we ought to have a program under which we assure a minimum level of income, of spending, and then let people spend it the way they want.
Absolutely. Good answer. Thank you.
Has socialism failed because its good qualities were perverted by evil men who got in charge? Was it simply because Stalin took over from Lenin that communism went the way it did? Has capitalism succeeded despite the immoral values that pervade it? I think the answer to both questions is in the negative. The results have arisen because each system has been true to its own values. Or rather, a system doesn't have values, I don't mean that, has been true to the values it encourages, supports, and develops in the people who live under that system. What we're concerned with in discussing moral values here are those that have to do with the relations between people. It's important to distinguish between two sets of moral considerations. The morality that is relevant to each of us in our private life, how we each individually conduct ourselves, behave. And then what's relevant to systems of government and organization are the relations between people. And in judging relations between people, I do not believe that the fundamental value is to do good to others, whether they want you to or not. The fundamental value is not to do good to others as you see they're good. It's not to force them to do good. As I see it, the fundamental value in relations among people is to respect the dignity and the individuality of fellow men. To treat your fellow man not as an object to be manipulated for your purpose, but to treat him as a person with his own values and his own rights, a person to be persuaded, not coerced, not forced, not bulldozed, not brainwashed. That seems to me to be a fundamental value in social relations. Whenever we depart from voluntary cooperation and try to do good by using force, the bad moral value of force triumphs over good intentions. And you realize this is highly relevant to what I am saying, because the essential notion of a capitalist society, which I'll come back to, is voluntary cooperation, voluntary exchange. The essential notion of a socialist society is fundamentally force. If the government is the master, if society is to be run from the center, what are you doing? You ultimately have to order people what to do. What is your ultimate sanction? Go back a ways. Take it on a milder level. Whenever you try to do good with somebody else's money, you are committed to using force. How can you do good with somebody else's money unless you first take it away from them? The only way you can take it away from them is by the threat of force. You have a policeman, a tax collector, who comes and takes it from you. This is carried much farther if you really have a socialist society. If you have an organization from the center, if you have supposed government bureaucrats running things, that can only ultimately rest on force. But whenever you resort to force, even to try to do good, you must not question people's motives. Maybe they're evil sometime, but look at the results of what they do. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Assume their motives are good. You know, there's an old saying about the road to hell being paved with good intentions. You have to look at the outcome. And whenever you use force, the bad moral value of force triumphs over good intentions. The reason is not only that famous aphorism of Lord Acton. You all know it, you've all heard it. Absolute power corrupts. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's the whole aphorism. That's one reason why trying to do good with methods that involve force lead to bad results. Because the people who set out with good intentions are themselves corrupted. And I may add, if they're not corrupted, they're replaced by people with bad intentions who are more efficient at getting control of the use of force. But also, the fundamental reason is more profound. The most harm of all is done when power is in the hands of people who are absolutely persuaded of the purity of their instincts, and of the purity of their intentions. Thoreau says that philanthropy is a much overrated virtue. Sincerity is also a much overrated virtue. Heaven preserve us from the sincere reformer who knows what's good for you and by heaven is going to make you do it whether you like it or not. That's when you get the greatest harm done. I have no reason to doubt that Lenin was a man whose intentions were good. Maybe they weren't. But he was completely persuaded that he was right, and he was willing to use any methods at all for the ultimate good. Again, it's interesting to contrast the experience of Hitler versus Mussolini. Mussolini was much less of a danger to human rights because he was a hypocrite. Because he didn't really believe what he was saying. He was just in there for the game. He started out as a socialist. He turned to a fascist. He was willing to be bribed by whoever would bribe him the most. As a result, there were at least some protections against his arbitrary rule. But Hitler was a sincere fanatic. He believed in what he was doing, and he did far greater harm.